This is a true story-style reconstruction based on multiple documented pilot encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena and formation flying shadows, drawn from Cold War and post-war aviation records and testimonies. Names and some details have been changed for privacy and narrative clarity, but the patterns, behaviors, and emotional reality are grounded in real pilot reports. The story begins in the loneliest hours of the night, in a place most of us will never see with our own eyes. 37,000 feet over the North Atlantic, where the world is reduced to instruments, radio voices, and a fragile shell of aluminum and light cutting through endless black. It is winter, early 1980s, a transatlantic red-eye, New York to London, another overnight crossing in a long career of overnight crossings. The Cold War is still the background radiation of the age. Somewhere, submarines glide beneath polar ice. Somewhere else, radar screens watch for the slightest hint of something coming across the pole. In the middle of all that tension, there is a different kind of watch being kept, by men and women sitting in cockpits, looking out over the curve of the Earth, alone with the sky. Our story follows one of them, a man we'll call Captain Daniel Dan Mercer. He's 51 years old on the night of this flight, with 25 years of flying behind him. He flew Phantoms over Southeast Asia when he was young and immortal, moved into commercial aviation when the war ended and the airlines were hungry for pilots with thousands of hours in their logbooks and steady hands under pressure. He's flown through monsoon storms that tore at the wings, watched St. Elmo's fire crawl along the cockpit windows like blue ghosts, seen distant lightning illuminating entire cloud towers from within. He has a list in his head of all the tricks the atmosphere can play: reflections, ice crystals, ground lights bending up through layers of haze. He has spent a lifetime learning to separate illusion from threat. He does not scare easily. Tonight's flight, on paper, is routine. A wide-body airliner, nearly full, pushing off the gate at JFK just before midnight. The cabin is a blur of winter coats, carry-on bags, quiet arguments about overhead bin space. People settle into their seats and into their own little worlds. Business travelers working through sheaves of paper, couples sharing headphones, a tired young mother trying to soothe a baby already crying at the unfamiliar pressure in his ears. Somewhere back in coach, a group of university students on their first trip abroad laugh too loudly at something the rest of the plane will never understand. Up front, beyond the locked cockpit door, the world is very different. There is no small talk, no chatter, just procedure. Dan runs his finger down the checklist, calling out each item in a calm, practiced voice. Beside him sits his first officer, Mark Ellis, mid-30s, clean-cut, meticulous, at that point in his career where every flight is still partly a test, partly an audition for future captaincy. Behind them, at the flight engineers panel, is old-school muscle memory and human form. Sam Rodriguez, former flight engineer on 3 different aircraft types, the kind of man who can glance at a wall of dials and tell you if one tiny needle is a fraction of a degree off where it should be. They are a small, self-contained universe of competence at the front of a long aluminum tube. Taxi. Takeoff. The tremor of acceleration pressing everyone briefly into their seats, the runway lights whipping past, the subtle weightlessness as the aircraft rotates and leaves the ground. City lights fall away, replaced by scattered islands of brightness, then by the vast unlit ocean as they arc northeast along their Atlantic track. New York recedes behind them, London still nearly 6 hours ahead, and the night settles in. By 2 in the morning local time, the cabin is mostly dark. Seatbelt signs are off. Most of the passengers are asleep or pretending to be. The hum of the engines becomes a kind of white noise, a lullaby. Somewhere in the back, someone snores. Somewhere else, someone quietly cries into a blanket, unseen, traveling towards something they both dread and long for. In the cockpit, the glow of instruments paints the 3 men in cold light. Greens,
soft ambers, the occasional sharp red warning if a system briefly shifts and settles. Outside the windshield is almost pure black. There is no moon tonight, just a fog of distant stars smeared by the faintest haze. This is the part of the night pilots call the quiet hours. Radios are sparse, punctuated only by the occasional handoff between controllers, position reports, altitude confirmations. They are over the ocean now, beyond the reach of most terrestrial lights, beyond the comfort of land glowing faintly on the horizon. Dan likes these hours. They're where he thinks most clearly, where he remembers that he is not just a bus driver in the sky, but a man holding a machine in a very thin slice of air between the crushing depth of the ocean and the airless cold of space. He takes a sip of lukewarm coffee, grimaces, and glances sideways at Mark. "You ever get used to the taste of this stuff at 3 a.m.? Mark smiles without looking away from his instruments. "It's not coffee at 3 a.m., it's survival fluid." Sam snorts softly from behind them. "Says the guy who still puts sugar in his. That's a crutch, kid." They chuckle. It's the kind of easy banter that comes from hours and hours of shared cockpit time. Outside, the stars watch in their ancient silence.
It's somewhere over the midpoint of the Atlantic, roughly halfway between the coastlines of North America and Europe, when the first strange thing happens. And it's small, almost unremarkable, the kind of thing a tired mind could easily have dismissed. Dan glances up from the panel and looks outward, letting his vision adjust beyond the reflection of the instruments. It's an old habit, a holdover from his fighter days. Never trust just the gauges, always look out. The stars are out in force, scattered across the sky with a sharpness you never see from the ground, each one a cold pinprick of light. And then, just off the right side of the nose, something isn't there. It takes his brain a few seconds to process the absence. A patch of sky where the stars should be, where they were the last time you looked, is now simply dark. Not cloud. He knows what cloud looks like at night, the soft, glowing smear of starlight diffused. This is different. This looks almost as if someone has taken a piece of velvet and laid it over the stars, a ragged oval of blackness, darker than the rest of the sky. He tilts his head slightly, blinks. The patch moves with his perspective just enough that he realizes it's not on the glass, not a smudge, not reflection. It's out there. He leans forward a little, hand unconsciously tightening on the yoke. "Mark," he says, quietly enough that his voice doesn't carry any alarm, just curiosity. "You see anything out there to the right? About 2 o'clock low?" Mark shifts his gaze, squinting through the windshield. There is a beat of silence, filled only by the murmur of the air conditioning and the distant thunder of the engines. Then Mark says, "Huh." It's a small sound, but something in it makes Sam swivel in his seat. "What are we hunking about?" Sam asks. "There," Dan says. "See that gap? Watch the stars just above the horizon line." They all stare. For a few seconds, their minds try to rationalize it. Perhaps a small cloud bank, thin enough not to show up on weather radar. Perhaps some kind of odd reflection off high-altitude ice. But the longer they look, the more that explanation erodes. It's not a cloud. It's too well defined, a long horizontal smudge of black that seems to have straight edges in places, like segments of a cylinder or the fuselage of a plane with no lights. And it is holding position relative to them. "Could be traffic," Sam says reflexively. "Military? No lights? At this altitude? In this corridor? They'd be talking to someone, and we'd have a TCAS warning." Dan's hand moves almost without thinking, flicking a switch to double-check the transponder and traffic collision avoidance system. The screen remains blank. Their own symbol, the familiar little airplane icon, sits alone in an empty grid. He calls their altitude back to himself. Flight level 370, their speed, just under Mach 0.82, roughly 480 knots over the ground tonight. At that speed, you don't pace another aircraft casually. Even small differences in speed open distances quickly.
Formation flight at night, with no lights, with a heavy airliner, over the Atlantic. The very idea makes the back of his neck cold. Gander radio, this is... He begins, and then stops. They're not quite in the next control sector yet. Maybe he's overreacting. Maybe it will peel off, resolve into something mundane in another minute. They watch. The shadow, whatever it is, maintains station. 2 o'clock off the nose, slightly below their line, just far enough that no feature is visible, just emptiness where the stars should be. It is neither approaching nor falling back. It is, for all intents and purposes, flying formation with them. Time stretches in the cockpit in a strange way. 30 seconds can feel like 5 minutes when you're waiting for something to change. Dan glances at the clock out of habit, notes the time down almost automatically on his pad. If this is nothing, it'll be a footnote. If it turns into something, that timestamp is the first anchor. Okay, he says finally, voice steady. Let's do this by the book. Mark, you keep your eyes out there. Sam, you give me a weather check ahead and off to our right. I'm going to make a shallow course correction. He twists the heading knob just a few degrees, nudging their nose left. Not enough to raise questions from controllers, just a gentle drift, as if compensating for wind. If it's a fixed object, like a cloud or something far away, it'll slide relative to them. If it's very close, it might swing across their field of view. If it's moving to match them, the plane responds, a subtle, giant's breath turn. The shadow, whatever it is, moves with them, as though glued to an invisible point on the sky. Jesus, Mark breathes, just loud enough for the cockpit mics to pick up. Sam mutters something in Spanish under his breath that needs no translation.
Dan feels something he has not felt in a very long time, something that combat, storms, emergencies, and endless simulator drills have not awakened in him. A slow, ice-cold wash of something older than training. Not panic, not yet, but a primal awareness that something is wrong in a way no checklist can address. He keys the radio. Shanwick, good morning, this is... He gives their call sign, voice calm. Level 370, reporting possible traffic at our 2 o'clock. Currently no contact on TCAS. Do you have any primary radar returns in our vicinity? The reply comes after a clipped pause. The controller's voice professional, but slightly tighter than usual. Negative. We show no other traffic in your immediate area. You are alone on that track at your level. He knew that would be the answer. Hearing it still makes his chest tighten. Copy, Dan says. We're observing a possible visual anomaly. We'll advise if it changes. Roger, keep us advised. He clicks off the mic, looks at Mark. Describe what you're seeing. Mark swallows. It's like a long shadow, he says slowly, as if picking his way through unfamiliar terrain. Darker than the sky. No lights, just an absence. And it's keeping pace with us. How big? Sam asks from behind them. Hard to say without reference, but if it's at roughly our altitude and at that angle, big. Bigger than a fighter. Maybe bigger than us. He hates that he's speculating. Pilots are taught to report what they see, not what they think they see. Still, something about it presses on him, demands a name. Hours later, when he sits in a meeting room with airline safety officers and men from agencies who rarely introduce themselves with full titles, he will be asked that question again and again. How big? How far? What shape? Did you see any structure? Any lights? Any surface detail? And he will have to keep saying no. Because the unsettling thing is that the more you looked at it, the less there was. It was not so much an object as a subtraction. Back in the cockpit, the minutes tick by. They dim the interior lights,
plunging the cockpit into a deeper twilight to keep their night vision sharp. The instrument panels become pools of soft green and amber, their faces side-lit like characters in an old noir film. Outside, the stars become even more vivid. The shadow remains, a streak of nothingness against the glittering field. At some point, Dan realizes he is leaning forward, shoulders unconsciously hunched, as if he could get closer to something that may be miles away. He forces himself to sit back, to breathe. He thinks of all the reports he has read, quietly, over the years. Foo Fighters over Europe, little balls of fire pacing bombers in the Second World War. Rocket pilots over the Pacific reporting luminous disks that danced around their wings. Cold War interceptors chasing impossible blips that out-accelerated anything they knew how to fly. Navy fighter pilots in more recent years describing objects that kept pace, changed direction in ways no conventional aircraft could, then vanished off radar as if they'd never been there.
He forces himself to breathe slower. "Okay," he says at last. "We're not going to do anything stupid. We maintain course, maintain altitude, maintain speed. If it wants to fly tag, it can fly tag. If it makes any aggressive move, we react. Until then, we keep flying the airplane." He hears his own voice, calm and authoritative, and wonders distantly if this is what all those World War II crews sounded like when they reported balls of fire pacing their bombers. Professional, contained, reporting the unreportable. Time draws out further, like a rubber band stretched just to the point of snapping. The second hour becomes the third. The sky outside begins to lighten imperceptibly, the absolute black softening to an extremely dark blue as the first hints of dawn, somewhere beyond the curve of the Earth, bleed into the upper atmosphere. The horizon, from invisible to a faint, razor-thin line, emerges. The shadow stays. Sometimes in those hours they talk quietly about mundane things, routes, hotels, small complaints about scheduling. It's an act of defiance, really, against the thing out there that wants to claim all their attention. Other times they fall silent, each man alone with his thoughts, his fears, his private calculations of what this might do to his career if he says the wrong thing to the wrong person after landing. Because that is the other, very human part of this story. Pilots know that some things are not taken seriously by airlines. Words like UFO stick to a file in ways words like unexpected weather or unreported traffic do not. And yet there are channels, quiet ones, through which reports like this do filter. From cockpit voice tapes into debriefs, from military flights into classified programs, forming a hidden tapestry of strange encounters that only a few ever see in full. History. At some point, perhaps because fatigue loosens his tongue, Mark says very softly, "You think it's them?" He doesn't explain who they are. He doesn't have to. Dan gives a half smile, eyes still on the windshield. "I think it's something, and that's as far as I'm going to go while we're still in the air." Sam chuckles once, humorless. "If it wanted us, we'd already be gone. So maybe it just wants to watch." There is something chilling about that idea, that somewhere within that absence of light, something is watching them the way a scientist watches an insect in a jar, curious but not compelled to interfere. Finally, with Europe at last creeping up under their nose and the world below them shifting from unbroken black to a patchwork of faintly glowing towns, the thing changes again. It falls back. At first, Dan thinks he's imagining it. The patch seems to shrink, to recede, sliding from 1 o'clock back to 2, then slowly drifting down and away, as if easing itself out of formation. The stars it has been obscuring gradually reappear, not all at once, but in a slow, almost reluctant reveal. "Are you getting this?" he asks quietly. "Oh yeah," Mark says. "It's breaking off." No radders call them with a belated, "traffic now leaving your altitude."
Whatever is out there is invisible to everything except their eyes. For the first time in hours, Dan allows himself to hope that this will end the way most flights do, uneventfully. The black oval thins out as it falls behind them, until it is just a slightly darker smudge against the dark, then nothing at all. The sky becomes just sky again. And then it's over. No dramatic parting, no streak of motion, no flare of light, just a presence that was there mile after mile, and then simply isn't. The cockpit feels abruptly larger. Their little bubble of light, which had felt compressed, pressed in on by that shared, silent company, opens up. They do not cheer. There is no fist pumping, no jokes, only the slow exhalation of men who had been holding their breath for hours. Dan notes the time down, hands steady. Later, after landing, the story continues, into meeting rooms where he recounts what they saw, into forms where he tries to fit an impossible experience into boxes labeled observation and weather and traffic. There will be serious faces listening, some skeptical, some haunted, some carefully blank. There will be quiet questions about whether he felt ill, whether he'd taken any medication, how much he'd slept in the days before the flight. He will not forget the moment when one of the older men in one such meeting, a retired military pilot now working in safety oversight, waits until the others have filed out and then lays a file on the table between them. "You're not the first," the man says. Inside the file are photocopied in black and white fragments of other stories. A CIA declassified report from the 1950s, a veteran mountain pilot describing an object that flew formation with him for miles, keeping exact pace no matter what he did. CIA. Another from a 1940s jet pilot engaging in what would later be called a dogfight with a bright, maneuverable light over North Dakota, the object reacting to him, then vanishing. Wikipedia. Another from two commercial pilots over Alabama watching a glowing wingless craft pull up alongside their airliner before soaring away into cloud at impossible speed. Wikipedia. Later still, much more recent, naval aviators caught on infrared video swearing in shock as unknown objects kept pace with their fighters, darting off at right angles, unbothered by the limitations of known aerospace technology. History. In each of these there is some variation. Lights instead of shadows, disks instead of ovals, aggressive motion instead of patient pacing. But the feeling under the words is the same. Something was there, with us, behaving as if our presence in the sky was of interest to it. "That helps?" the older man asks. Dan stares at the pages. "Helps," he says slowly, "to know I'm not crazy. Doesn't help to know this is bigger than my one night over the Atlantic." The man smiles without humor. "Welcome to the club," he says. "Officially, you saw nothing we can identify. Unofficially, you saw what a lot of other good pilots have seen. Write it up, file it, then go home and get some sleep." Years will pass after that night. Dan will fly hundreds more crossings, watch hundreds more dawns from 37,000 feet. He will never see that shadow again. But some nights, in the quiet hours when the cabin is dark and the sky is clear, he will glance out at the stars and feel that old familiar tension in the back of his neck, waiting for a patch of darkness that does not belong. And in his logbook, on a page filled with flight numbers and altitudes and times, there will be one small notation that looks, to anyone else, unremarkable. Unidentified shadow pacing aircraft approximately 3 hours. No radar contact. No TCAS. Visual only. That single line cannot capture the weight of the experience. The slow grind of those hours, the way the world seemed to narrow to that dark shape and their fragile metal shell beside it. It cannot capture the way it felt to be observed by something that did not care whether you believed in it or not. But it is there, written in ink that does not fade, a quiet testament in a pilot's neat hand. Some skeptics will say, with good reason, that there are many things this could have been. Atmospheric phenomena, Optical illusions, the complicated dance of light in a cockpit filled with glass and instruments and tired eyes. We know now that certain combinations of sun angle, clouds, and aircraft position can create impressive illusions, from glories and halos to shadows cast on haze layers we don't even consciously register. Reddit. Others will point to how memory warps under stress, how three men in a closed space can reinforce each other's perceptions until they are sure of something that never really happened. But there is something stubborn, something quiet and solid in the way Dan tells the story in his old age, when he's long since retired, sitting at a kitchen table with a mug of tea instead of bad cockpit coffee. I have seen illusions. I have seen reflections, St. Elmo's fire, glories, lenticular clouds that looked like flying saucers, you name it. You log enough hours, you see all the tricks. This wasn't a trick. This was a thing. It was with us. It reacted to us. It left when it was done, and no one can tell me what it was. He does not sound angry when he says this. He sounds humbled in a way. Humbled by the reminder that even in an age of radar and satellites and supersonic jets, the sky still has room for mysteries. For every documented case, every radar tape or declassified report, there are dozens of stories like his, told quietly, over coffee or beer, between people who know what it means to trust their own eyes at altitude. They form a shadow history running parallel to the official one, a history of watchers being watched. And in that history, one winter night over the North Atlantic stands out, not because anything dramatic happened, not because anyone was harmed, but because for 3 long hours, a pilot, his first officer, and his flight engineer shared their tiny human space with something that was not supposed to be there. A shadow that paced their plane mile after mile, as if reminding them that the sky is not empty,